Hello and welcome to another episode of the B2B Leadership Podcast. My name is Nils Vinje, and today my guest is Don Schmincke. Don, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Don, so you're an author, a researcher in the area of strategic performance research. And there was one element that I saw on your website and doing the research and that we talked briefly about before that I got to ask you that I'm really curious about. There was a note that you got shot off an aircraft carrier, and I'm wondering if you could tell us the backstory on that, because that was something I was not expecting doing my research on you.
Yeah, in our research the past 20, 30 years, we've been doing expeditions to various parts of the world. And, you know, one of the books I wrote that Oxford gave me permission to publish was an ancient manuscript called The Code of the Executive. And that started making the rounds of the Pentagon. And former nuclear submarine commander referred me to the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Secretary of Defense. And so I was invited as part of a group of people to get behind the scenes. And I turned it down. I said, like, I can't afford, 3 weeks to, but then the Secretary of Defense called me back, made me an offer, couldn't refuse. He said, no, you don't understand. We're going to show you what CNN is not allowed to see. And you have permission to ask anybody anything you want at any time. And I'm like, okay, I'm all in, a new research project. And I was studying the military historically only because of, the high strategic planning failure rates in industry, but nobody had gone back to ask the people that started it, the military, how you do strategy. So I thought it'd be a fabulous time. So one of the things we did is we rendezvoused with the USS Carl Vinson, and that's where I got landed and shot off.
That's awesome. That's such a good story. And hanging out with the Joint Chiefs of Staff and Secretary of Defense, that's some impressive, an impressive crowd. All right. So there was something else you mentioned to me before about the fact that there are 35,000 books published every year, yet the failure rate from a leadership perspective of the implementation of a lot of strategies that are in a large percentage of those books is something like 70, 90%. Can you share a little bit of background on that and what your research has led you to believe as far as why the effectiveness of so much content is so low?
Good question. When I left MIT, I went to Hopkins to start my graduate work and ended up teaching there. And I got attached to the executive MBA programs. And I started running into a lot of executives that were just complaining about the difficulty in these, putting these best-selling management books into action. So they asked me if I could do a biological study, and it kind of changed everything, because it's like, the problems we're dealing with, they're not only shared around the world. Like I'll do maybe 70 CEO group speeches a year, and I'll ask them every time, what are your top issues and challenges and concerns? And then they're shocked when I show them a slide that has everything they just said on it, and the slide is like 20 years old.
I love it.
So they, and then I go even further. I take the Oxford gave me permission to use this ancient manuscript, and I published that, The Code of the Executive, back in the 90s. And I show them the contents of that book, and it's the same thing that they're struggling with. So they're realizing, wow, this is shared worldwide and it's ancient. What are we missing? And that's what started the whole journey into looking at us as a species. And that's when we started getting involved with some really fabulous discoveries and research. So I went back to look at how many business books are published, and that's when 35,000 came out. I was just shocked. I thought, my God, we publish more on business and leadership than we do on cancer research. But at least we're making progress in cancer research. We're still dealing with 700-year-old or older issues. And kind of fascinating. And what was more fascinating is no one ever talked about it before. Like I asked 30,000 CEOs, have you heard this? And they're like, no. I'm like, it's solo. It's like you have to be scholarly in a bit and take a look at the research published. And actually, Google has done us all a favor, because they have this part of Google called Google Scholar. And if you type that in, you'll get to their Scholar database. And if you just type in management theory of failure, you get over 5 million hits of scholarly academic papers on that. And that's what started me into this thing, to find out why is no one talking about this and why is it failing? And so, what we found out is that the books were fine. In other words, they had great ideas. They had good, what you got to do and how you have to do it. But none of the books were changing human decision. And that's why CEOs are frustrated, because the decisions didn't shift, the behavior didn't shift. And so that's why a lot of bankrupt companies, you can pick up all the best-selling books when they liquidate their assets because they had them all on the shelves.
Absolutely.
Wait a minute, this is a clue, everybody. Bankrupt company has all the best-selling books on their shelves, and the big ones hired the authors. So shouldn't we be asking better questions? Which started this whole thing. So,
okay.
Hopkins and got here.
Fascinating. All right. And we're going to get into some of those reasons why behavior doesn't change through talking about some myths, some leadership myths. So Don's going to share some, I'm going to share some. We're going to have a nice discussion about these. So Don, what's the first myth that you want to share?
Oh, this is fun because I just finished a manuscript for a book coming out in the fall and called Winners and Losers. And, what I learned from 30,000 CEOs. And one of the things I learned, one myth is that we're teaching that followers follow leaders. And that's not true. And how I found out about this is Apple started using some of our research that my colleague Cameron Lugman started pioneering on innovation in the brain and creativity in the brain and all. And I noticed the books about Steve Jobs after he died weren't very complimentary on his leadership style.
No.
And then I did more research on others that were great, like General Patton. I mean, they said he was an asshole. And then, I'm sorry, I said a cuss word. Can I cuss on your podcast?
It's okay. Yeah, it's all right. We'll let it go.
And then, recently, they published like Mother Teresa wasn't a very nice person either. I'm like, what, Mother Teresa? What's going on? And it turns out that people aren't following you. What they're following is the story, what we call the compelling saga that you represent. And that's why they follow Jobs and these other people. I mean, there's a list of all these people. In fact, Forbes did a thing on, great CEO successes who are assholes. And so you don't have to dig very far. But I'm not telling everybody you got to be an asshole. Okay, so that's not my point.
let's be clear about that. Yeah.
But I think by studying them, it showed that people are following the story we represent. They're not following us as a person. And that's what a leader should do. A leader should be the person that creates that strategic, compelling saga that aligns people for the greater cause.
Wow. Yeah, that's powerful. And the myth of that people just follow other people, no, they're following a story. They're following a story they want to be part of. I think that's an incredibly important element of leadership, is being able to craft that story and be able to tell that story and be able to compel other people to want to follow you. So it's super cool on that first myth. Okay, my first one is what I call the solo myth. And the solo myth says that I can figure all this out on my own. And I think you'll probably agree with me that 35,000 business books a year and not enough change will lead us to the fact that, you can't figure this out on your own, or it's going to take an obscene amount of time and effort and energy. Yeah. And there's always a path to follow, right? There's a path, whatever structure it is, there is a path to follow to get you to where you want to go. So if you want to be the person to be able to tell that compelling saga like Don just talked about, there's a path to figure out how to become a better storyteller. And somebody else has already figured out how to teach you how to tell a better story. This is not something you need to figure out on your own. Yeah. And much the same, if you want to figure out how to bring a group of diverse people together from a worldwide base where you don't get to be in person all the time, hey, there's a path to follow. Right? You don't have to figure it out on your own. And this is one that I see come up over and over again because people get busy and the assumption is, well, should be busy and I should be figuring this out on my own. That's why the company hired me to figure this out. Right. The reality is there's always a shortcut to take, and the shortcut is simply a matter of finding the person who's done what you wanted to do, pay them money, and follow their path. Right. What do you think about that one, Don?
I think it's a good point. I mean, sure, you could probably do your own adrenal surgery for a disease, but it'd be better use someone else.
Yeah.
But which is actually a story that someone actually tried to do that, and they said he was almost there before he passed out. So
Wow.
yeah, you can do it yourself, but why?
Yeah, why? Okay, cool. All right, so what's myth number 2, Don?
There was a myth out there we kept running into that we teach planning all wrong, and I got this out of working with Black Hawk Down. And Black Hawk Down was a great place to study planning because it was the most epic planning failure in military history. And what was interesting is working with Matt Eversman was that, you need a plan, but the execution probably won't happen. So we teach planning like, well, here's the plan, and then we're going to meet every month and see how we're doing. And if you're not on plan, you should be embarrassed. And, and so therefore, don't tell us if you're off course until it's too late. And
I've been there. I've been there for sure.
I ask those all the time. I'm like, have you ever found out about a problem you could have found out about months earlier? And they're all like, yeah. I said, because the shift here is they're believing that they need to be on plan, and that never happens. No. And so what we're trying to do is shift the beliefs of execution to say, look, you're going to be off course. And what I learned in Black Hawk Down was that was the phrase, the enemy has a vote on your plan, and the enemy may not vote for it. So for adaptation, and it is that kind of resiliency you need. So if you're not constantly adapting and you think your plan's going to work, you're going to have a problem.
Yeah, I believe that. So what is the message then? Because everybody's still going to build a plan, quarterly, annual, whatever, 3-year plan. So what is the shift in message that you would recommend to make it okay to not be on the plan? Like, are you telling people like you should not be on plan? This is our plan, but you should not be on here? Or is there a different way to approach it to make sure that it's okay to not be on plan because we want to find the problems early enough to figure out how to solve them?
The belief shift is that don't expect to be on plan. Now, if you're great, but don't expect to be there. In fact, your meetings should be, because I ask audiences all the time, how many of your meetings are news reports?
Yes.
Well, I did this, I did that, I did this. As I said, that's a waste of time. I mean, you can just upload that to Slack and read it later. You don't need to have a news report. I said you only should have meetings for solving problems, making decisions. Meaning, where are we off? Where are we on? And for where we're off, let's work together to figure it out. And it was interesting. There was an interview. It might have been Inc. magazine. I'm trying to remember where I read it, where the chairman of Toyota had formerly run an American plan. And one of his new executives was being what an American manager, how they're being. I come in looking good to the boss. I did that right. I did this right. I did that. And the conversation was like, hey, we know you're a good employee, but please bring us your problems so we can work on them together. And that was a total belief shift. So what if every American meeting was for problem solving, where they accepted that, hey, we may be off course sometimes? Because, who sails a boat, leaves the dock, sets the rudder and the sails, and so that's it. We'll just lay back and wait till we get to the other side.
I'm good.
So that's what we do. That's a myth.
Okay, it's really interesting, and there's another analogy that I've heard in this area around the a plane flying from San Francisco to Hawaii. Right? There's a starting point, there's a destination point, there is a plan that is filed with the FAA for how it's going to go, but the reality is it is not one consistent straight path to get there, even though there's a curve going across the curve of the earth. What's happening is hundreds and even probably thousands of small corrections along the way based on wind speed, altitude, weather, other things going on in the atmosphere that are causing the plane to constantly adjust and the pilots to constantly adjust to ultimately get to that end destination. So, the plan that was laid out, it was ultimately executed, but was it dialed in exactly what was laid out? Nope. Yeah. Okay, so question for you on advice that you would share with someone who is in an environment where there is a heavy focus on plan, and the focus is more on the traditional side of we're below plan, we're at plan, we're exceeding plan, and that's it. Like, it's not really about the problems, it's just about monitoring the progress of the plan. What recommendation would you have or advice would you share with them to help maybe shift a little bit of the conversation internally around the fact that we got to solve problems instead of just talking about the plan?
Well, first, it depends on what level they are. I mean, if it's the manager or the CEO running the meeting, then I'd say let everybody watch your podcast.
Deal.
Right? So it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And then really look at what has been the damage from not course correcting, from not speaking the truth, from not being brave enough to step up, to not feeling safe enough to step up and say, hey, this didn't work out. We thought the customer was going to do this, or the market was going to do that, or the competitor would do that, and it didn't happen. And so this is the change, and we have to address this and course correct. And that's really what it is, to shift the beliefs of the team that course correction is how you win wars.
Yeah. And that shifting beliefs is no small task, but it can be done. But it takes courage, right? It takes a belief in yourself that you can bring this to light. And if you listen to some of the things Don's saying, and you read Don's books, and you listen to some things I say, you're going to build the courage in order to step up and show up differently. All right. So my second myth, I call the freeloader myth. Freeloader means essentially my company has to pay for everything. And to our point before of there's always someone out there who has done what you want to do. You need to follow the path that they've set forward, and you can take the shortcut. There's often this conversation, especially in the professional world, that, well, I want to go to leadership training. I want to go to one of Don's seminars. I want to work with Nils. I want to work with XYZ person, whatever it is. I have to see if I can get approval first. And then approval inevitably doesn't come because there's some other use of that funds, or it's just not something the company is willing to do. And then the individual might stop and then not go to Don's seminar, not work with Nils, not work with a coach, not get to the next step, right? Mm-hmm. And so the myth is that the company has to pay for everything. The reality is they shouldn't. They should not, 100% not be paying for everything. If they can help support, great, that's cool. But there's a belief that I champion, Don, I'd love to get your input and feedback on this, that every employee is the CEO of his or her career. And it is their job as CEO to increase the value of them, they are their single greatest asset, so that they can contribute more value to their organization and more value to their network and their family and their friends, et cetera. But it is the employee's responsibility, whether you're manager, director, VP, or even C-level. Right? I believe that the hands in the growth and development is in the hands of the employee as opposed to the hands of the company. And this is a shift over time that we've seen in the last 40 years, where a lot of people went from working for one or maybe a couple companies, where the predominant thinking was, if I sign up and work for this great company, they'll take care of me and eventually I'll retire and get a gold watch or something. Yeah. Now, though, we're in a fundamentally different era than we've ever been from an employee and employer relationship. And I believe it's much more a relationship based on value as opposed to time or one side being more dominant over another. And that value can only come from the growth and skills and development. And I believe that it is every employee's responsibility to own that amount of value that you're bringing to the table. It is not your employer's responsibility to make sure you bring more value. Curious for your thoughts on that one.
Well, if it's one of my programs, the company should pay for it for every employee. Okay, now that shameless plug is out of the way.
That's okay.
I think it's. I think it all depends. I mean, there's yes. I think each person should be their own CEO and their own resource, and say, what can I do to make myself more valuable for the future, and that I'm having most fun at, or that I think my future contribution could be this, and invest in that or co-invest in that with the company. On the other hand, if the company's taking, let's say, a strategic shift, and they need everybody aligned on a particular training so that everybody is on the same page, then that's a different situation. Like a lot of times, like a CEO will hear me in a speech, and it's like, God, I wish I had my upper two levels of management here, because they all need to know about how, why strategic planning fails and how to fix it, or why our culture change programs aren't changing culture and how to fix it using these scientific anthropological techniques. And I'll go in and do their workshop for everybody. Now, what happens? They all have the same level of thinking, same level of languaging. They have their action stuff gets on the table that needed to get on the table. So that, in a sense, is an investment the company makes for
Great
that
point.
performance. So it really depends on the situation. But generally, I agree with you. It's like each individual is responsible for themselves,
Yeah.
and they should look at that.
Yeah, and 100%, and totally get that point about if it's going to be a company thing and company led thing. Yes, 100%. And I'll just drive in the point for everybody in the audience here. The amount of access you have to world-class experts in any discipline or domain is greater today than it ever has been in the past, and will continue to get more so every day into the future because of all the wonderful capabilities that we have of connecting with anybody in the world, anytime, any place, and the number of experts who have found a way to teach their expertise to help other people grow and develop. So there's no stopping you.
And that's even going to go magnitudes greater because of the whole chat GPT, artificial intelligence thing. Like I wrote a book in 20 minutes. Chat GPT wrote it. I was doing an experiment, and I published this thing just 3 or 4 weeks ago called Unleash Your Potential. And the subtitle was How Artificial Intelligence Wants to Upgrade You. And what I did is my MIT frat brothers were bantering about this, AI becoming more human, et cetera. And I said, nobody's asked AI what it would do with us. And so and it became like number one on Amazon within probably for 5 minutes. But it was a great experiment. But what it showed is that I can literally, if I can write a book in 20 minutes, and I told the audience, I was honest, I front end the book, this is me, and then there's a page saying everything from here on is a machine. And then I wrap it up. So it was an experiment to look at how it's still a child, but even as a child, what did it select and why did it select that? As a professional, it's amazing what you can find out. If you had some question in leadership or human behavior or your career or whatever, you can start talking to this thing and it'll start having a conversation with you.
That's fascinating. It's so cool. I mean, the age that we're in right now, it's just so darn exciting. All right, Don, we probably have time for one more myth from each of us. What's your next myth?
Oh, boy, that's interesting. The myth of happy employees. I know there's a lot of speakers and books on, hey, you need happy employees and this and that and the other thing. But, I get to these CEO groups and I'm asking, I said, have we gone a little bit overboard on happy employees? I said, we're so reactive that we're forgetting what has caused the greatest civilizations, the greatest armies, the greatest companies to emerge. And that is, yeah, you want happy employees, but are your employees focused on some challenge ahead? It's what we call the compelling saga, some challenge ahead that they realize they need each other to achieve it. And they're willing to do two things we never teach in our business schools: suffer and sacrifice with me. Now, if you have a group that's brave enough and passionate about achieving what's next, they're willing to suffer and sacrifice to get it done, I'll put that team up against any happy employee team any day because I know who's going to win. And we see this in our movies. We see this in the sports legacy movies and this movies. And it's like, this is what it pulls us together, because what I found out in this research is that, what makes employees happy? Winning.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And when I wrote that's coming out this fall, winners and losers, that's a key point there. It's like, yeah, you don't want to exhaust employees. And of course, and you want happy employees, yes. But if the strategy of the company is happy employees, I'm not sure. You got to step back a little bit and say, does this make strategic sense for winning?
Yeah. Is the happy employee really the focus, or is it a byproduct? Because if you're winning, and if you're in that place where you were willing to suffer and sacrifice and go through something that you believe is tremendous because it's a very compelling story that the leadership and the company as a whole is taking on that saga, then the output and the byproduct is going to be happy employees, right? It's less of a, we have to figure out how to build happy employees than we have to figure out how to do this the right way. And that byproduct is we'll have some incredibly happy, but also really engaged people.
Yes.
That's awesome. Great point. Okay, my last myth is the time myth. And this one goes like this: I don't have time, Don. I don't have time to learn, to implement, to change, to discover new things, to find experts. I don't have time. My plate is overflowing. I'm underwater. insert whatever business generalization that is straight out of Dilbert that you want to use. It just cracks me up, right? And the reality is that every single person in the world has one thing in common: the exact same amount of time every single day. So why do some people get exponentially more done with the exact same finite resource than other people? Right? It's a choice. And that's why I think this is a really powerful myth, because it is a choice how you spend your time. It is not up to your company to determine how you spend your time. It's not up to your boss. It's not up to your employees. It is up to you. You're the only person who can determine the appropriate way to spend your time to deliver at the highest level for you, your customers, your employees, your leadership, your company, your shareholders, your board, everybody. There's only one chief that gets to say how you should spend your time, because you're the one that knows you best. What do you think about that one, Don?
I think so too. I think, and in group behavior, we notice this interesting element: how much of your time is wasted in dysfunctional behavior.
Yeah.
And when I go into companies and do these workshops, we make it a safe place for them to. I mean, they list these dysfunctions anyway because we have a way to do that. But then we say how much time is being wasted in politics and backbiting and turf building and all the names, right? The stuff you see on the Office television show all the time, right? That behavior, which people think The Office is a comedy. It's a documentary.
It is a documentary. It's 100% real. Yeah.
So I asked them how much time is wasted in that. And we get a range. Now, we've done this with 30,000 employees, managers, CEOs, and they all say the same thing. It's a 20 to 80% range, average is 50%, like a bad person. I think most CEOs are wasting well over 20% of their organization's time. I mean, they're not wasting it, but they're wasting that much time. And so and they're saying the same thing, but it's different. It's like, well, I don't have enough employees to get everything done. I'm like, you do. You just got to put the other half back to work. You see, and the lights go on, like, oh, geez, and so that's when we get into the compelling saga piece. It's like, why are they showing up? And so I think you're right. Time is available because individually I'm in charge of it. And as a leader, you're also in charge of it because how much time is being wasted that you could regain if everybody became aligned.
Yeah. Love it. Love it. Awesome. Don, well, we've had some fun busting some myths on the leadership side. Love your expertise, your angles, and all the incredible research that you've done in the thousands and thousands of CEOs and companies you've worked with. Honored to have you as a guest and share some of your insights with us. Where can people go to find out more about you and that upcoming book this fall?
Yeah, we're trying to keep everything focused on Saga Leadership. That's like we stole it from the Vikings, SAGA, leadership.com. And so stay tuned with that. We're going to be doing some really cool things this year. And so new research and new things coming out.
Exciting. Well, maybe we'll have to have you back for another myth-busting continuation, because this was a lot of fun. So thanks so much for your time, Don. Take care, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.